And the Carolina Panthers find themselves looking to draft their next franchise quarterback. And to me, Joe, the indications are that it's going to be CJ Stroud. But Frank Reich, he's not going to give the game away. The head coach met with the media yesterday, and he talked about all 4 quarterbacks, all 4, because we have to keep up appearances that all 4.
Chuck Amato with the 4 running backs.
Yes,
3 of them never played. But
he's like, which of the 4 do you like? Because, we're really discussing all 4.
How many of the 4 quarterbacks you guys have targeted are you comfortable with that could be the guy?
Like, really? I think that's a funny question. I think they're all have really good traits. I think they all have really good traits. I'm excited about all of them. Scott and I, and all kidding aside, we were having a conversation. I love this for the NFL, right? You got 4 guys who are going to make an impact in this league. I do believe all 4 of these guys will make an impact in this league. So, and excited to see them and excited to see how that plays out. It'll look different for every one of them. Will have a different journey, right? And then there's some other guys who, we're not even talking about who I think are going to make an impact in this league. So it's good for the NFL.
That's Frank Reich, head coach, Carolina Panthers.
This is best Rob Lowe NFL hat. Yeah. I'm just here to watch them play.
Hey, man.
Hope everyone has fun.
That was pretty good. They all got great traits. He was asked specifically about Bryce Young, the guy that you think the Carolina Panthers will end up taking.
We're first and foremost just looking for playmakers, right? You look at everything, every trait that a guy has, and you weigh it, right? You weigh it. The thing is if there's 10 categories that you look at in a quarterback, or any player for that matter, the real question is not how to evaluate each of those categories. That's a part of the question. A big part of the question is how much you're going to weight each of those categories. So they're all a factor. Everything's a factor. But ultimately, it really comes down to being a playmaker, being a guy who can make plays all over the field. And that happens a lot of different ways.
Yeah, so there's Scott, there's Frank Reich, really giving you nothing on a question specifically about Bryce Young. Now, the one thing that Frank Reich wanted to let everybody know, and we see this in the actions by the Carolina Panthers this offseason, it's how they've built their coaching staff and how they've gone about free agency. And Reich talked about the message that their free agency moves are making.
Excited about how the roster is continuing to be built. Having a chance to be active in free agency, don't take that for granted from Dave and Nicole Tepper and the support that they've given. And really what he and I have talked about, and Scott, is the message that's sending, right? The message that's sending to our fan base, the message that's sending to our team, our coaching staff, that, we mean business. And so we're making the steps necessary to continue to improve this team.
So that's Frank Reich. Here's Scott Fitterer, the general manager, on setting up a roster to help a rookie right away. That's what these moves have been about. And obviously they have to put the right quarterback in place to make this work.
That was the intention behind a lot of what we did over the last few weeks, is to have to give those guys the weapons they need to be successful. Like I said, we like our offensive line. To bring in a Miles Sanders, not only is he a good runner, but he's a good receiver out of the backfield, so he's the outlet. Hayden Hurst going down the seam, great hands. It's a dimension that we're adding to our offense because Frank uses the tight end so much, and he's a player that they identified that they wanted. To have Adam Thielen, who can separate quickly, Terrace Marshall, who's on the come right now, Laviska, that's a really good group to surround a young quarterback with, and he's got playmakers now.
Again, that's Scott Fitterer, the general manager of the Carolina Panthers. Joe, I will admit I am self-aware that I can be a little too online. And the one thing that is starting to annoy me is that any move that the Panthers make, I see an image of Scott Fitterer with like the based eyes, like they're glowing, like, oh man, he's like 8 moves ahead of everybody else, or he's in on every deal, or Frank Reich evaluating quarterbacks, and he's Thanos with the final gem that he needs, and he just has to snap, and the NFC South will crumble in front of him. Like, Panthers Twitter is on one right now. And maybe I spend too much time on Reddit where they're kind of in the same boat too. We're like, look at them playing 4D chess. This is like every team that does this. All of the moves seem good. It's all for naught if they don't got a damn quarterback.
Yeah, I want to go back to what Frank Reich said about how all 4 will be good for the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't happen often. The transition from college to pro has changed in the sense that the pros are now running more of a college-style offense.
Mm-hmm.
So, even 10 years ago, there were questions, can Cam Newton go from Auburn to the NFL? How can he ever make this transition, right?
That's why Blaine Gabbert, you have to give him a serious consideration.
We don't have that question mark as much anymore. And if you just go to 2020, you could find a draft where 4 quarterbacks made it. Now, it wasn't the first 4 taken. We had Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, right? You would say that those 3 guys have made it.
Yeah.
For sure. And then Jalen Hurts was taken in the second round of that draft. I don't think there's any question after the year he just had with Philly that he's made it. The question mark for that one's going to be Jordan Love, who was taken in the first round. Hurts wasn't. So does it happen that 4 quarterbacks will make it out of the same draft? Sure. But more often than not, it's not all 4. Let's go to 2019. Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones, Dwayne Haskins were the 3 quarterbacks taken in the first round. Kyler Murray has had his moments, but I wouldn't want him. And I think that's what's hurting Bryce Young right now. The size of Kyler Murray, the size of Bryce Young.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Jones just had an amazing playoff game where he looked like a combination of Lamar Jackson and Brett Favre when he played against Minnesota. And then he ran up against the Eagles defense, and he looked like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold and the poo-poo platter that we've seen
the Eagles defense
the last few years
Eagles
in Charlotte.
Is pretty good.
So you're right. A lot of this is voodoo, and a lot of this is you almost have to go back to the Bill Parcells chart. How many starts did they have in college? What is their size? And, bring them in, talk to them, and figure out, are they going to be on the same page as you are? How do they handle success? How do they handle failure? Because it's not going to be all paved with champagne and roses, especially that first year, Joe.
No.
And I think that's kind of changed. That has also changed in how we evaluate quarterbacks, because we think, well, Justin Herbert came in and he looked like $8 million in his first year in the league. Yeah. Well, Justin Herbert's the exception. Guys are going to struggle. That's the way it is. It's normally how it is.
Height is something that people are obsessing over with Bryce Young. I also don't think it's height. I also think it's his
size,
frame.
His frame.
Too.
Yeah, he played at about 180 pounds at Alabama last year.
And folks are trying to say, well, look. You remember Frank Reich? He had a high grade on Russell Wilson too. In fact, Frank Reich talked about it at his press availability yesterday. Here he is talking about how he viewed Russell Wilson. In 2012.
Everything matters. All those conversations matter, especially when it's, Scott Fitterer, it's the GM, and he's talking about a guy like Russell Wilson, who, by the way, I had a very high grade on. You don't have to read anything into that, but I don't mind telling you that I had a high grade on Russell Wilson. Okay, but don't read anything into it. I'm just saying that because all these people are putting this label on me that I only work with big quarterbacks. Don't read anything into that.
Did you have
I'm trying to play reverse psychology. No, that's the thing. I guess when you got the number 1 pick, the thing is right. We don't have to play games, right? I mean, it's not like we're trying to fool anybody. What we're trying to do is take all the time we can on the evaluation, right? Do we have inclinations? Do we have feelings? Do we have evals kind of written out on paper and in our minds? Yeah, we all do. And there's a lot of conviction, as Scott said, on some of these top quarterbacks. And you're right, the old adage, don't make a decision before you have to. We're going to take every second, every day, or every hour, every day to make this decision, and we still got plenty of time left.
That's Frank Reich, head coach, Carolina Panthers, invoking Russell Wilson as to don't read too much into his frame, although I would make the argument that as short as Russell Wilson was at that time, the 5'10" thing, his frame was completely different, okay? And I think that's why there's a difference between somebody like Russell Wilson and Bryce Young. Speaking of the evaluations, they're going to go on a pro day road trip. Darren Gann at Panthers.com pointing out that the whole crew is getting together and they're going to visit these various pro days. I think they know who they want. Why else would you move up to the number 1 spot? You move up because clearly you believe in a guy and he's not going to be there for you at 9. Or that you could move up to the 5 spot and get that person there. They truly feel that one of the quarterbacks that they wanted was going to be gone by the 2nd pick. So how do you negate that? Well, you do what you did, and you move up to the 1 spot, and this is why I think it's CJ Stroud. You look at the history of what Frank Reich has worked with, what Frank Reich likes, and CJ Stroud checks the boxes for that. There's less questions about that, other than the mobility aspect of it. But we can go back to various press conferences with Frank Reich where he talks about almost, yeah, man, there's still a way a quarterback's got to play, right? He still has to be able to do it in the pocket, right? Well, what does CJ Stroud do? What did we see from CJ Stroud? The only knock on CJ Stroud that honestly is the one that keeps coming up is, well, do you want to take an Ohio State quarterback? Are you sure? Do you want to look at the track record of Ohio State quarterbacks? Does that really matter? Does that really matter? If that's the case, then every quarterback from NC State should have been drafted 1. Okay, but it didn't work that way.
Well, the Ohio State knock is you're playing with, it's kind of like USC.
Yeah.
You're playing with such a talented cast around you that you're maybe not used to.
Well, then what about Alabama? Like, you're playing with a pro team.
For a long time.
And now
that was a knock on Alabama.
We got like 3 Alabama guys now starting games.
It only takes one guy to change the narrative.
Exactly. And that could be CJ Stroud, honestly. And that's why I think it's going to be him. That's who they wanted. That's why they moved up to the 1 spot.
I will say the thing about the diligence, though, and I would say, yes, you're probably right that they knew, but there's nothing wrong with going through the process. Whereas if you stayed at 9, you're going through a process where you don't even have a chance at 3 of the guys, right?
No, that's true.
So I think you do go up. You probably have an idea, but you shouldn't know until that last week of the draft that who you really want, because you want to go through this whole thing.
Yeah.
And not to go full draft story, but you want to call you do. You want to call the middle school coach. You want to call, hey, who showed up at your 21st birthday party? You got to do all of those things to make sure that you're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's.